You're watching DD India Live, India's voice to the world. I'm Lipakshi Khurana, coming up in the next 30 minutes. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi calls for making international systems and institutions more inclusive, democratized, participative and fair, delivers remarks at the third Summit of Democracy, asserts India has an ancient and unbroken culture of democracy. World leaders convened for the first ever nuclear energy summit in Brussels to discuss how nuclear power can help drive sustainable development. Antony Blinken to meet with ministers of Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, UAE, Jordan and a top Palestinian official in Cairo as efforts continue to secure a ceasefire, even as Netanyahu tells US Republican senators that Gaza war will continue. And Wall Street gains steam as Federal Reserve keeps 3 rate cuts on the horizon, also keeps key lending rate unchanged for the 5th consecutive time. Well, on to the details now. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi on Wednesday emphasized the need for inclusivity, fairness and participative decision-making in international systems and institutions. He said this while delivering the leaders' plenary of Third Summit for Democracy.
In the era of turmoil and transitions, democracy faces many challenges. This requires us to work together. Democratic countries should lead the efforts in making international systems and institutions more inclusive, democratized, participative, and fair. Only through such shared efforts will we be able to fulfill the aspiration of our people. And we will also lay the foundation of a secure, stable and prosperous future for the generations to come.
While calling Summit for Democracy a crucial platform for democracies worldwide to exchange experiences and learn from each other, the Prime Minister reiterated that India has an ancient and unbroken culture of democracy.
India has an ancient and unbroken culture of democracy. It has been the lifeblood of Indian civilization. Consensus building, open dialogue, and free discussion have resonated throughout India's history. That is why my fellow citizens consider India to be the mother of democracy.
Well, India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi's state visit to Bhutan has been postponed due to ongoing inclement weather conditions over Paro Airport. It has been mutually decided to postpone the state visit of India's Prime Minister to Bhutan on 21st, 22nd March 2024. New dates are being worked out by two sides through diplomatic channels. Earlier, Prime Minister was on a state visit to Bhutan on the 21st and 22nd of March. An Indian Air Force on Wednesday said that they have inducted a helicopter unit at the Air Force Station Thanjavur in Tamil Nadu. The Indian Air Force said that the induction of the helicopter unit at Thanjavur would ensure availability of sufficient resources with headquarters of Southern Air Command. It would enhance operational capabilities as well as meet the peacetime tasks of search and rescue, humanitarian assistance and disaster relief and casualty evacuation. The induction of helicopter unit took place on the 24th of March. And the Indian Coast Guard ship Rajdoot on Wednesday rescued as many as 8 crew members of a distressed vessel. The distressed ship IFB Ajmer I had a major flooding at sea approximately 10 nautical miles west of Kundapura off the coast of Karnataka. Indian Coast Guard ship Rajdoot reassured the crew and provided deep flooding assistance. After confirming safety of boat and crew, it handed over the disabled boat to buddy boat IFB Goldfish for further towing towards Gangoli harbour. The rescue operation took place on the 20th of March. And now let's get you the latest on what's happening in India and the run-up to the world's largest democratic election. Well, conducting polls in India, which has over 968 million eligible voters, is no mean feat. Our next report tells you more about the logistics behind the world's largest election.
968 million. That's the number of registered voters in India. It is more than the combined population of the United States and the European Union. In 2024, nearly 50 countries including the US and Mexico are going to polls. More than 2 billion voters will cast their ballots and nearly half of them will be in India alone. The more you delve into numbers, you realize that conducting general elections in India is a mammoth exercise. India is the world's 7th largest country by land area, comprising 28 states and 8 union territories. The Election Commission will conduct the 2024 general elections to elect 543 lower house members in 7 phases from April 19th to June 1st. The results will be out on June 4th. Over 15 million election officials will be deployed across 1 million polling stations throughout the country. Over 5.5 million electronic voting machines will be used for the exercise. Of the total 968 million voters, 497 million are male, 471 million are female, while about 48,000 belong to the third gender. Also, nearly 18 million voters will exercise their franchise for the first time ever. Let's also take a look at the key statistics of the last Indian general elections that were held in 2019. There were over 900 million eligible voters, out of which 600 million people cast their ballots. The final turnout stood at over 67%, the highest ever for any general elections to date. Nearly 4 million electronic voting machines were deployed across 1 million polling stations, and over 8,000 candidates and 670 parties were in the fray. That's not all. The polls, which cost 600 billion rupees, are the world's second most expensive elections after the 2020 US presidential election.
Well, the world's first nuclear energy summit will focus on using nuclear power in sustainable development. Officials and energy executives from all over the world are attending Thursday's summit in Brussels. They're expected to discuss how atomic energy can pave the way for a net zero carbon emissions future. DD India's Ishan Garg has more from Brussels.
The summit is hosting a mix of politicians, scientists and energy company executives. It's being organized by the International Atomic Energy Agency and Belgium, which currently holds the rotating presidency of the European Council. Belgium's Prime Minister Alexander De Croo says an energy crisis sparked by Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine has emphasized the need for green energy. And the Nuclear Energy Summit will enable partners to discuss ways to harness atomic energy for a sustainable future. The day-long summit will delve deep into the fundamentals of using nuclear energy for civil purposes. Several panel discussions during the day will focus on harnessing electricity from nuclear fuel, as well as developing cohesive nuclear policies. The summit comes at a time when countries globally are making big pledges towards net zero carbon emissions. The issue was supported again at the COP28 Global Climate Summit in Dubai last year. India wants to become carbon neutral by 2070, while the EU wants to attain that target 20 years earlier. Financing climate-friendly energy projects, such as nuclear-powered ones, is a major hurdle for both, though. That conversation is expected to be front and center at this summit. Government officials and heads of energy bodies will discuss ways to finance projects, especially for developing nations. Host country Belgium says the use of nuclear energy will not only clean up the environment but also generate jobs and spur innovation. However, it is going to take a collective effort by the global community to make nuclear energy a sustainable reality. Ishan Garg in Brussels, reporting for DD India.
And U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken arrived in Saudi Arabia on Wednesday, marking his 6th visit to the Middle East since the Israel-Hamas conflict began. The U.S. top diplomat will meet the foreign ministers of Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Jordan, the Emirates, International Cooperation Minister and the Secretary General of the Palestinian Liberation Organization in Egypt today. The leaders will discuss Gaza ceasefire and efforts to deliver more humanitarian aid into Gaza. Talks on a truce brokered by Egypt and Qatar are resuming this week in Qatar. Earlier on Wednesday, Blinken also met his Saudi counterpart as efforts continue to secure a ceasefire in the Gaza. Also, Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu told U.S. Republican senators on Wednesday that Israel will continue its efforts to defeat Hamas in the Gaza Strip. The conservative Israeli leader spoke to Republicans via video link nearly a week after the Senate's Democratic Majority Leader Chuck Schumer gave a speech in the Senate criticizing Israel-Gaza conflict. Well, several countries have continued to airdrop food into Gaza despite the challenging circumstances. As aid through road and sea routes remains slow, the flights provide a lifeline for a small number of Palestinians in the enclave. DD India correspondent Alex Cardia reports more from Jordan.
Well, the United Nations has warned that tens of thousands of people in Gaza could be facing famine in a matter of weeks if things don't change. And like here with the Royal Jordanian Air Force, for days now they have been trying to airdrop supplies into the Gaza Strip. This particular C-130 Hercules aircraft is loaded with 8 tons of food, of baby powder, of anything that these starving families in Gaza could need. But they recognize that this aircraft can only carry about half a truck's worth of supplies. And we know that Gaza needs 500 trucks on a daily basis. So they are doing what they can, but some of the crews operating these flights recognize that this is just a drop in the bucket. Alex Cardia in Jordan, reporting for DD India.
Meanwhile, the Israeli army found Hamas weapons, money and operatives during their raid at Gaza's Al-Shifa hospital. The IDF released a video on Wednesday which showed soldiers uncovering rifles and a rocket launcher. The IDF also claimed that over 50 Palestinian gunmen were killed and 180 suspected militants were detained during the raid on Al-Shifa hospital. Israel's raid at the hospital began in the early hours of Monday. IDF said it had sent in special forces based on intelligence that the hospital was again being used by Hamas. And on to update from Russia-Ukraine conflict now. A Russian missile on Wednesday hit an industrial area in Ukraine's northern city of Kharkiv, killing 5 people and injuring at least 8 and causing a major fire in a printing house. Kharkiv region, which borders Russia to the north and lies close to the front line, has suffered regular attacks during the war. Rescuers rushed to the site to fight flames covering an area of more than 2,000 square meters. The mayor of Kharkiv, Ihor Terekov, said 5 others were missing after the strike. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky said the strike underscored the lack of proper air defenses in Kharkiv. And White House National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan said during a trip to Kyiv on Wednesday that a major U.S. aid package that has been blocked by Republicans for months would get to Ukraine and vowed that Washington's support would continue.
We have stood by your side since this war began. We have provided enormous support, and we will continue to do so every day in every way we know how. Now, I know there are questions here because of the back and forth in our Congress in the months that have gone by without the supplemental bill coming through, the package of aid that you rightly deserve and that President Biden is fighting for every day, the $60 billion that the Senate has passed on a bipartisan basis, and now we're working with the House to pass. But from our perspective, we are confident we will get this done. We will get this aid to Ukraine.
Meanwhile, India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi held a telephonic conversation with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky on Wednesday. Two leaders discussed ways to further strengthen India-Ukraine partnership in various spheres. PM Modi called for dialogue and diplomacy for ongoing conflict. PM Modi added that India would continue to do everything within its means to support a peaceful solution. President Zelensky appreciated India's continued humanitarian assistance for the people of Ukraine. The two leaders also agreed to remain in touch. Earlier, Prime Minister Modi also held a telephonic conversation with Russian President Vladimir Putin. India's Prime Minister congratulated Putin on his re-election as the President of Russia. The two leaders agreed to make concerted efforts towards further strengthening the special and privileged strategic partnership between the two countries in the years to come. And still to come on this edition of DD India Live. Indonesia's Prabowo Subianto wins February 14th presidential election, winning most votes. Election anxiety gripping voters in the US, people stressed with economy, immigration concerns. And junk-grabbing robot set to clean up space debris. Robotic arm could soon be going into space with an important mission.
India that invents. India that innovates. India that excites. India that invites. Land of possibility. Teeming with opportunities. Watch India Ideas each Thursday, 8 p.m. only on DD India.
How does the world's largest democracy hold the world's biggest election? Watch Connecting the Dots to get the full picture. Every Friday at 8 p.m. IST on DD India.
Welcome back. You're watching DD India Live. I'm Lipakshi Khurana, and moving on, Indonesia's Election Commission on Wednesday formally declared Prabowo Subianto the winner of February 14th presidential election, winning most votes. Prabowo, a three-time presidential candidate, is expected to take over from outgoing President Joko Widodo, known as Jokowi, in October. The former Special Forces commander and current Defense Minister Subianto won the February 14th contest with nearly 60% of votes, a resounding win over rivals Anies Baswedan and Ganjar Pranowo, who received about 25% and 16% of votes, respectively, according to the official tally of the election body. And moving on, the United States is set to have its first presidential rematch in 70 years in 2024 elections, with President Joe Biden and former President Donald Trump securing their candidature for a face-off. However, voters are deeply divided over who is best placed to lead the country, with concerns over the economy, reproductive rights and immigration at the top of people's minds. Worries over who will win the Oval Office and the lead-up has been dubbed election anxiety by psychologists. Sally Patterson reports for more from New York.
There's déjà vu in Washington, D.C. US President Joe Biden and former President Donald Trump are set to go head-to-head, vying once again for the White House. Last time round, in 2020, so-called election anxiety gripped the nation. For many, those feelings could now be flooding back.
I think that there's multiple layers of election anxiety. Obviously, many people have anxiety over what will be the outcome of the election. But another issue that I see coming up for people a lot is actually just anxiety about election season, because there can be so much interpersonal conflict. So even talking about the election or arguments, or what if they disagree with somebody, that type of anxiety I think is also very prevalent.
Some Americans are seeking ways of coping with the stresses of election season, be it through altering their news intake or even seeking mental health support. Others are taking more drastic measures, with applications for second citizenships really taking off.
There are some people that are looking for a plan B. They are looking for a place where they can relocate. They are looking for a place where they can send children for education. They would like to go for residency and investment program. Among them, the most popular ones are Spain, Portugal, Greece, European options.
Since the COVID-19 pandemic, latitude groups seen a spike in interest from the United States. Managing Director Christopher Willis tells me he's seen an over 300% increase as the country heads towards the election.
Depending where people sit and where their values are, it could be things such as, another mass shooting. It could be to deal with, taxes on the wealthy, for example. There's recent announcements regarding Roe versus Wade, which triggered a lot of people as being a reason why they want to look at different options. So people are just getting nervous in general, and so they want to make sure that if things go a way that they're not comfortable with, they have an option to go somewhere else.
Many clients invest overseas. Others qualify for citizenship by descent. Natalie Bloomberg is looking into her Polish ancestry. Her father moved to the US after World War II. Now she thinks European citizenship could give herself and her children more opportunities.
I love to travel, and so I think, there's this wanderlust, and with the political situation now and people's tensions are up, I always think, well, history might repeat itself, and it's good to have options.
Worries are particularly high among certain demographics. Young people, for example, and immigrants on temporary visas. More than 2/3 of US adults say the 2020 presidential election was a significant source of stress in their lives, according to the American Psychological Association. The prospect of this year's two-man race, for many voters here, means an all too familiar, anxious road ahead. Sally Patterson in New York, reporting for GD India.
And news from around the world now. The unrest food crisis persists in Cuba as residents grapples with continuous power cuts and hunger. Cuba is battling its worst economic crisis in decades, caused in part by the COVID-19 pandemic, which saw the flow of much-needed tourism dollars plunge. The Cuban government points finger at US after hundreds of people demonstrate against food shortages and blackouts. A major outbreak in Argentina of dengue, a mosquito-borne illness that can be fatal, is on track to smash previous records, reflecting wider worry around South America, where warmer and wetter weather has led to a surge in cases. Over 120,000 cases have been recorded so far in Argentina in the 2023-24 season, with the bulk of those in the last 2 months. That puts it far ahead of the previous season, already the worst on record. Junk-grabbing robot set to clean up space debris. This robotic arm could soon be going into space with an important mission to grab old satellites and other space debris floating around the Earth's orbit. The makers hopes to have the ADR junk-grabbing craft to reach the targeted orbit within the next couple of years.
That could generate far more debris. At stake are billions of dollars in assets.
On to some business news now. Wall Street's main stock indexes closed higher on Wednesday after the Federal Reserve eased investor jitters by keeping borrowing cost unchanged and reinforcing expectations that rates could be cut as many as 3 times this year. Stocks added to gains after Fed Chair Jerome Powell said in a press conference that despite recent inflation data coming in hotter than expected, the numbers haven't really changed the overall story. The S&P 500 gained 0.89%, while the Nasdaq Composite gained 1.25%. The Dow Jones Industrial Average average rose 1.03%. Caroline Malone reports for more from Washington.
Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell said on Wednesday that policymakers do still intend to cut interest rates before the end of the year, potentially 3 times. However, the Federal Reserve decided to leave interest rates unchanged at this week's meetings. They continue to study inflation and are trying to get price increases down to 2% in a sustained way without tipping the economy over into recession.
The FOMC decided to leave our policy interest rate unchanged and to continue to reduce our securities holdings. Our restrictive stance of monetary policy has been putting downward pressure on economic activity and inflation. As labor market tightness has eased and progress on inflation has continued, the risks to achieving our employment and inflation goals are moving into better balance.
Well, major inflation data points such as the Consumer Price Index and personal consumption expenditure were actually up in January and February, which indicates to the Fed that inflation is taking a non-linear path down.
The February number was higher than expectations, but we have it at currently well below 30 basis points core PCE, which is not terribly high. So it's not like the January number. But I take the two of them together, and I think they haven't really changed the overall story, which is that of inflation moving down gradually on a sometimes bumpy road toward 2%. I don't think that story has changed.
Well, Powell pointed out their policy's successes, that the economy is strong, the labor market is strong, and that inflation has come down since peak highs over the last 2 years. Well, analysts say it shows the Fed needs a good reason not to cut rates, but it also wants to make sure there's a soft landing. Caroline Malone in Washington for DD India.
All right, that's all for this edition of DD India Live. Well, let us know your thoughts on the news of the day. You can connect with us on Facebook, X, formerly known as Twitter and Instagram. We'll be back with more news as it breaks here on DD India. I'm Lipakshi Khurana from all of us here in Delhi. Thanks for watching DD India Live.